Good morning, everyone. My name is Jen Walinga. I'm a professor in the School of Communication and Culture at Royal Roads University, and welcome to this episode where we're going to be offering a bonus reel with Dr. Adrienne Leslie Toogood, who is going to talk to us about what's happening within multi-sport organizations to rebuild cultural integrity across our system. And she's got some really great information to share and some initiatives to talk about. I come to you from the lands of the Lekwungen and Quisepsan First Nations. We are very committed to indigeneity within our university, but also committing to truth, healing, and reconciliation. Even though we're not directly responsible for inflicting harms in the past, we do need to bear the responsibility of reconciling our actions, behaviors, processes, structures with the values we uphold, which are equity, access, respect, peace. We try to learn from our land on campus. We have 300 hectares of old growth forest, a variety of beautiful gardens in which to ponder and reflect and meet up with our learning communities. But, really the nature is always telling us how important diversity is, how important it is to respect one another. Our survival actually hinges on it. And I find truth is constantly communicating those kinds of principles. Sport is constantly communicating those kind of principles and truths as well. There's truth in sport and within the environment in which we're operating. I mean, I'm often on this beautiful lake in Victoria, BC, but the fact of the going backwards in a boat, that skinny little boat that's so tippy, is always teaching me something every day. And I was on the erg machine this morning, actually, with a group of women, but constantly being taught these lessons of perseverance and camaraderie and positive focus and just belief in yourself, right? So many lessons every day. And that's why we acknowledge the professional experience that our athletes have gained through their international competition and training, just like we do when we acknowledge any kind of professional experience at Royal Roads for credit. We use our flexible admission policy in order to provide credit for that kind of learning that you've gained in professional context. And of course, the webinar was born of the power of sport, the fact that sport has huge reach, huge impact, is one of the most participated in and watched and loved and hated human endeavors in the world. And it's so great to see so many sport participants, athletes, officials, coaches, leaders who are leveraging this giant platform in order to work for change, social change in the world around respect and equity, peace. And so the webinar was born of that. How do we leverage sport? Within sport, how do we do sport better, but also how do we leverage the power of sport to foster positive social change in the world? And it really has to do with leadership. We're all leaders in this sport environment. So how do we do that better? And today I'm going to welcome Dr. Adrienne Leslie Toogood. She's a sports psychologist, but she also is the lead of the Culture of Excellence program at Podium, a multi-sport organization that is introducing an initiative that helps, and I'll let her talk more about it, of course, but that helps sport organizations that sign on to it to understand, get a read on their culture, and then design a roadmap going forward that they can follow to monitor and build and sustain and enhance the culture going forward. And by culture, really, we're just talking about the values and beliefs that are then communicated through our structures, our policies, our processes, our behaviors, our actions, our processes, right? It shows up everywhere in the climate of the place, but it's actually very concrete. And so what values are we actually communicating? What values do we want to be communicating? And then look for the alignment, the congruity between what we say, the walking and the talking, right? So hi, so great to see you.
And it's great to see you as well.
Always great to see you. Always great to have a good conversation with Adrienne. So today we're going to be talking about, we've talked to a couple of sport organizations, national sport organizations, but you're coming from, and you're involved in a lot of different things, and I'll ask you to share a bit about all the work that you do. But today we want to hear a bit about a special initiative by a multi-sport organization, which is on the Podium, and around culture and building culture across our system. There are lots of initiatives going on, of course, but this is one of them. But let's start always by, can you tell us a little more about the roles you play in sport, because you play many, and why sport for you? Why is it even something you commit so much time to and really our lives to, right?
Oh goodness, that's a large question. I know I was on one other webinar and I can't remember how I answered it, so I'm like, oh, I hope it's not too discrepant. Um, Sport's always been a really big part of my life, and even when I engage in other things, I always seem to come back to sport. And it's definitely, a place where I grew up. It's interesting. Just before this call, I was talking to an athlete that's going to trials to go to Paris, and that's a very stressful period of time for an athlete. And I think lately, when I've been talking to athletes, I've been talking a lot about the idea of when we do hard things, it's an incredible opportunity to learn about ourselves. And you can't escape from yourself. You show up. So I just think doing hard things is such a gift, and it allows us to learn about ourselves. So um, yeah, I love sport. I think growing up, well, I know that sport played a very big part of my life. And as I reflect on it, I just think that sport was something where I I had a lot of control over the environment. I did the work. I reaped the rewards of it. It was my thing. And I think that um, sport just has tangible targets where you can tell if you're getting better, you get feedback. So it's an environment that I love. I love the community of sport. And yeah, I think there's just lots of good about it.
All those fun memories, hey, and community, you automatically, I know, so I was talking to a kid recently too, and they're entering into a university setting, and I think, oh, it's just your own community, right? You have all those friends, all those memories. Lovely. And the hard things. I love that. All right. So today we're talking, well, lately, we've really been talking about culture for a couple of months now on the webinar and just
Mm,
trying to communicate that idea that, look, we all contribute and we all have a role to play. We all can be leaders in our sport system. And we talk a lot about culture, but what does culture really represent for you? And why do you think it's so important in this conversation
mm.
sport right now?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a really important conversation. And I think we're all trying to understand what culture looks like, what culture is. I honestly think that's both sport and outside of sport as well. Obviously, as a world, we've gone through a global pandemic, and coming out of it, I think everyone is a little bit different. We spend a lot of time by ourselves, maybe. We lost people. We're reflecting differently. We're looking at what's meaningful for us. I know in a number of environments, people are talking about their mental health and wellness more than they used to. People are asking for things they may not have asked for in the past. And I think that everyone's trying to figure out how to work that in. You alluded to kind of like a project and that I've had the privilege of being involved with, and that's called the Culture of Excellence Project. And the Culture of Excellence Project is very much about how do we value people and also performance? How do we value both? How do we bring both into the equation? And again, I think it's both inside and outside of sport where we're really trying to find that blend and that balance. If someone is struggling, do we still demand of them? Do we still ask? And recently, I had a webinar that I was part of, and there was someone from the medical community. His name is Dr. Faisal Siddiqui, and I find him just incredibly articulate. And he was saying, I think we're all trying to figure out a way to kind of honor ourselves, but also still be accountable for our life's responsibilities. We can't and so I just think everyone's trying to wrestle with that and figure it out. And I think that sport's very public, and there's been a lot of conversation around it. And the other thing about sport is there's just a lot of passion, and there is a lot of investment in it and a lot of care. And whenever you have that deep investment and care, you have really strong opinions and thoughts about how it should happen. And one of the things I think it's always a process, and I think we definitely have at times gone through process where we didn't do a good job of giving each other grace. And there was a lot of judgment and finger pointing and strong opinions. And I think to solve it, we need everyone to be heard. And in this Culture of Excellence project, and Jen's going to be like, I will not ask her any more questions again because this is quite an elaborate answer to not my question. But one of the biggest gifts is the incredible group of humans I have the privilege of working with and collaborating with. And and as with anything, you learn so much from everyone in the room. And one of the humans that I've learned a ton from is named Katrina Munton, and she's doing her PhD at Columbia University. And she just talks about the challenges to hearing each other in some of these communities. And sport has been very closed. It's been a closed system, and we need to bring more openness into that. And whenever there's that power structure, it's tough to hear voices. And because I think more broadly about things than probably any human should. I often, because my background, which I didn't even answer from the first question, is I am a psychologist by training, and I've worked with athletes for a number of years in that capacity. And um, I think that, when we think about basic humanity and basic, humans want to be part of community. And literally it's in our brain that, Kelly McGonigal calls about when we're stressed, we release certain hormones that ask us to connect with other people. And so I think sometimes those human traits work against us in these spaces because we want to be part of community, and um, we sometimes are afraid to not be in that community anymore. And so sometimes we have trouble saying certain things, or speaking up or holding accountability. And I think as a community, we're figuring out what that looks like. I think in the sport community, we have certain processes, whether it's the SDRCC or the Universal Code of Conduct. So we've brought these things into play, but they're very much downstream things. And in my experience, having gone through that process with a number of different athletes, because again of that passion that athletes bring and coaches and everyone in the sports system brings, those are really difficult processes. And I haven't seen a lot of successful resolution in them. And so I think with this culture piece, what we're trying to do is create space where we can honor each other, we can have conversation, and that it doesn't result in that end point. Instead, we can have conversation before and grow together and learn to kind of respect and belong together. So the culture of excellence process is something that I was hesitant to get involved with because I am incredibly passionate, and I am someone where I have to do things in a way that's authentic to myself. I just can't do it any other way. And anyone who works with me would tell you that. And what's interesting is I think because I've done the work that way, I have such deep connections with everyone. I honor everyone in the room, but I do risk being tossed out of the community because I do need to honor the space, because I honestly think that we can only get greatness by creating space where people can bring their whole selves. That's what sport is. Sport is about taking risk, and I can only take that risk if I feel safe. And um, so I was I was like, oh goodness, do you really want me? Was actually the beginning part. I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if you really want me, because I will ask the hard questions. And um, but I think that's what we need, is we need to be able to hold space for each other, and we need to do it in a way that's authentic and that people feel valued. And um, so what is meant by this process is to provide space in the way that Katrina was suggesting, so we can look at what's in the room, and for perhaps the first time, because in the past maybe we haven't been able to be honest with each other. We haven't shared truth with each other. And so in our role as facilitators, we have a tool called the cultural assessment audit tool, where everyone has the opportunity to share and to have that question. And I know you were involved with one of your past webinar guests in the sport of boxing, where you got to experience that process as yourself, as an external facilitator. And it's really meant to allow us to be able to look at what the information is and then work with it. And through that process, we've had, we continue to grow kind of in our process of doing it. But as a leader, it's very hard to see that truth sometimes. And we honor that. And I think that's where we've gone wrong, perhaps in this process, is we don't understand it's hard for everyone, and it's also hard for the person who may have led in a different way, but the world has changed and evolved and things are different, and there's been a lot of hurt. We need to honor that hurt, but we need to allow the hurt so that we can grow and get better. And being able to sit with a leader and help them understand that it's okay. This doesn't always, reflect on you. There's other solutions. You're not alone. How do we do this? But also it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This is what people have seen. And we also know it's a new process. And so people have filled out a lot of questionnaires before. And we also know that it's a process that over time, people will recognize perhaps that it is different. We want truth so that we can honor that and that we can deal with what's in the room. But it will probably take a few iterations for people to believe that, if they've had experiences where it hasn't gone that way before. So again, it's not me. There are so many people involved in it that are incredible humans, and the process is what it is because of the other people in the room. I believe a lot in a transformative leadership model where we're better with everyone's contributions. And I'm so thankful and appreciative for all their energy they put into it. But we have a whole process. We also know that you can't just show up and be like, do this questionnaire, we're done. We have to, it's all relational. Sport is so relational. It's so important that we are relational along the way, so that we are able to get truth, from the questions, and that then we honor what we've heard and that we're relational in the way that we provide that feedback in the process we go through. And it ends in an action planning process. And that needs to honor where the National Sport Organization is in their process, whether that's an annual process. One of our sports is waiting till the end of their season to do it because it's just too hard right now in their season. Um, but also honoring the limitations too, and helping us to think of how to move it forward. And yeah, as I said, it's been a real privilege to meet with some of the national sport organizations, to work with the leaders, to try and help them figure out how to add this culture piece to an already very busy plate, and to help them understand the benefits of it and how it will free time, down the road. And no one wants to end up in the spot that we have been in and that we circle back to. I haven't seen it be a great place for many folks, and so yeah, we're trying to help athletes be great. And to be great, we have to honor both the people and the performance. In my own life, I talk about creating human first space. And if I'm really in a good mood, I'll talk about creating human first brave space, which I learned through some diversity training I was actually doing with another national sport organization. And one of the leaders in diversity was saying that they actually don't use the word safe a lot because it's very difficult to tell what's safe for another person. But they use the word brave. And how do I create a space where people can ask hard questions, say when things are going well and not going well for them? Like, how do I create that kind of space? And I always think of it from a human first perspective, because we are all human beings at the end of the day. And we have pretty predictable tendencies when things are not going well for us. Some of us pull back, some of us become aggressive. Like, those are human tendencies, and it's information. And how do we honor humanity as we're doing this work? Because we have to honor humanity if we're going to make progress, because we show up as people. So I don't even know the question, Jen, but I'm not even sure what just happened, but I just sort of was going
I
on.
am. I've been paying attention. And what I'm loving is how you're really just linking back to your initial answer about why sport's so important to you, what you loved about
Yeah.
you talked about it being difficult, hard thing,
Mm-hmm.
tough feedback that we have to actually, download and do something about, but it's our responsibility, which is great. You talked about how important sport is for learning, and this is what the culture process is about actually learning, because we can't learn if we aren't feeling safe enough to be brave, and I agree.
Yeah.
I think I sent you this article about the misconstruence of psychological safety, and sometimes it can get misused as about being nice, 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 and that becomes toxic.
Mm.
But it's actually about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and being comfortable enough to say, this isn't working, or can we look at this, or challenge the system, right? So, and that all starts with being safe to be yourself. So all these things
Mm-hmm.
you've touched on and
Mm.
appreciate about sport, and it's also crucial if sport is going to actually heal and do better. And not, we have to have the disclaimer, it's not all broken. There's so many beautiful things happening, obviously, in sport, but
Yeah.
seeing a rash of, right? So let's go there now. You talked about it
Mm.
being one of the flaws perhaps in our system, and it could be global, maybe just Canada, but we're trying to fix Canada. Is it?
Oh, why not fix the world, Jen? Just do that. You
I know,
go.
I do that too. And I'm thinking Canada tends to, self-sacrifice like we did in 88, and then we have good advice for the rest of the world, and it can lead to some good change. So I think that's we're a good pilot. But mention that we're a closed system. Sport can be really closed. What do you think? Talk more about that, but then also, what do you think are why are we where we're at with some of these challenges? And we'll get more into the CAAT and talking about culture, but culturally, what do you think is broken? Like, where have we gone off track? Where are the incongruities? Where are the contradictions, the hypocrisies? Where are these kind of big cracks? I always like to call them cultural cracks in our system, in our organizations.
Yeah, a fairly large question. Oh, and again, I would say, one person's opinion. No, I think that Yeah, I think that in sport, because it's a closed system, there's people end up having a lot of power and then protect that power. So I think that maybe when you look at some of the movement that's been happening in the space, it's very much been a people kind of throwing rocks at glass houses, and I don't know if that's sustainable when you look at the way Canada's structured and you look at the way our systems are. I do think that um, you have to help it be safe for people in those powerful leadership roles to feel comfortable moving into that conversation. I'm going to say it this way. I think, as you know, Jen, from interacting with me, I sometimes kind of go to really random places and stories, but I will bring it back. I think of my own personal experience, and in my past life, I was a faculty member down in the United States. I worked at Kansas State University. They may or may not want to be associated with that, but I was a faculty member down there. And maybe I shouldn't say this actually, because this is my internal world when I was in that role. But I moved down from Canada. I completed a pre-doctoral internship there, returned to Canada. I was invited back to start a new academic degree program down there. And because of that, I taught a lot of the graduate seminars. And I was teaching one graduate seminar. And so it was all PhD learners, and everyone in that class was the president of a small university in the United States of America. So here I am, fresh graduate student. I did a clinical psychology degree, and now I'm sitting in a room. I've never led anything in my life, so it was a little intimidating, a little daunting. And so for myself, I'm like, okay. Now, when you're a professor, as you know, you kind of have to think about what your pedagogy is, and you have to sort of justify the way you're doing things in your annual materials, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh, what is my pedagogy? So I found something called the constructivist philosophy. And the constructivist philosophy is very much about creating an environment where you might know the topic that you wish to speak of, but you're going to open up the room to the wisdom and life experience that exists in the room. And the philosophy is that it'll be a much richer learning experience for everyone in the class, because I can't possibly conjure up or create that environment just on my life experience. So it's like, I know we're learning this certain concept, but I'm going to have certain questions that I structure and certain things I do to invite that wisdom and life experience in the room. So then I was looking at that and I thought, yeah, I have to do that. I can't possibly, because it's a 3-hour class and evenings are driving in for, I'm like, I can't possibly load up 3 hours with wisdom because I really am so much further behind these people. So I thought, I'm going to do the constructivist philosophy. So I was like, okay. And then I thought it was a great idea until about an hour before this class, you see, my first class. And then I was like a complete mess, because I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm opening it up. What if they talk about things I don't know about? I was sharing power. And it was like, oh my gosh, it was incredibly stressful. And then, but I'd already committed to it. I had no PowerPoint. That was what I was doing. So I went for it. But let me tell you, it probably took 3, 6, 9 months, maybe a year, a very long time for me to become completely comfortable with the process. Because if I was going to lecture, I controlled everywhere that went, even though I could decide what I thought was important to bring into the equation. I could decide all that, but this was about sharing power. It was about inviting everything into the room, and it's a very different form of leadership. And so for me, I sometimes reflect back on that experience when I'm working with leaders, and it helps me be empathic to what I'm asking them to do. So I think what we're asking leaders to do now is, if you're going to go from a closed to an open system, we're asking them to be very anxious and uncomfortable for a period of time while they figure out what that looks like. And I think that rather than speak in that way, and say, I'm anxious and uncomfortable with this. Instead, sometimes we might go down a path where we say, well, that's ridiculous. That won't work. And that's, I think, a human way of reacting to what we're asking. So I think we're asking, and then at the end of the day as well, even there's one organization I'm working with right now, and we're talking about the concept of collaborative leadership. And then there's a misunderstanding with that as well. They've gone from, an environment where they had a very strong leader, and now it's more collaborative. And there were a lot of people that didn't feel like their voice was heard and they weren't able to do it. But there's pros and cons to everything as well. And I think that we're not acknowledging some of the pros. It's way easier to lead in that other way. And also, then people within different levels of the organization get to be very well liked because, oh, it's that leader that's doing that. And if we're asking for that, there's so many layers of that transition. And so perhaps what I'm also kind of leading to in my head right now in this very moment is just the patience that change is hard. It takes time, and everything is information along the way. And we have to give space to it. We have to give grace to it. We have to be kind to each other as we're working through it. And it takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day, Jen. But yeah, I know from my lived experience, I can definitely recognize times where I've struggled in doing what I'm asking people to do. And so how do we support everyone through that process, including the people who do have the power and the responsibility, so they feel safe and comfortable and optimistic that it's also going to accomplish the organizational goals that they have, because that's part of the complexity as well. They have a lot of pressure on results and performance. And I guess the last thing this is also from my time at Kansas State University. I had the privilege of working in a department where I had a very strong leader. And um, there was one time where myself and one of the assistant ADs came up with what we thought was a brilliant proposal for at-risk student athletes on our campus. And we brought it into our dean, and he said, okay, he's like, I can hear your passion for this topic, but the way you phrased it actually is not going to work. The people in charge are not going to be moved by the things that are moving you. You need to rewrite that in a way where those administrators will value it. Do you think if you treat people this way, they'll be retained longer? Okay, yeah. Do you think that then, okay, so you need to look at how much tuition revenue is, that will motivate them to change. So, and it's not that they're uncaring people. It's just that's what the responsibility of their job is. And so I think one of the challenges is that we all have different things we value, and we're trying to sell it to the other person from our value proposition. And then we're getting frustrated when that's not what means to them, but they have very different responsibilities in their job. And in my other life, in my private practice world, I talk a lot about mental health for performance. And again, that's where we have two things that were often very separate. Mental health, and we need to be very caring and compassionate. We can't demand, but I always say, no, I think they go together. You have to be mentally well to perform and do things with meaning and purpose, and you have to be doing that to be mentally well. Like I think they go together, and all these things go together, but they've been so separate, and there's so much passion in the different spaces that um, we've sort of haven't been talking with the same language or in the same place, recognizing that we both have the same goal at the end of the day. And that, okay, the very last thing that will be completely, I was at the Safe Sport International conference in London, and I flew over there, and that first day when you go to Europe, you're just trying to stay awake. So I was like looking, I'm like, okay, we got some danger territory here. I cannot go to sleep until at least 8 at night. And so I happened to be walking past, and I saw this place that had a few ABBA items on display. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I went in, and then I ended up talking to the people. I'm like, is there like some sort of ABBA event tonight? And they're like, oh yeah, there's this concert at 7 or whatever. I'm like, really? So I like randomly ended up going to this ABBA concert. Let me tell you, Jen, I was in there, and it was such a celebration. First, I was not dressed appropriately. Everyone had their ABBA gear on, but it was such a celebration of community and life. And I couldn't help but reflect on that is why people love sport. It's not about what's the threshold for okay and oh, not okay. It's like, how do we create an environment where people can thrive and people can go for greatness and try and be the very best for it? Like, how do we do that? And maybe that's the conversation we need to have, rather than, where we're at kind of right now on a day-to-day basis. So anyways, once again, a rather long answer. So maybe we'll just do like a couple of questions, and that's all we'll get to. I don't know. But
And I think you're at it. You're really hitting it on the head, where there's this confluence, or there's um, this battle between conceptualizations of sport and organizations. Like we've always been corporate, this is sport, but actually sport can map right on top of an organization. And when we talk about being accountable, I mean, that's sport. When we talk about doing hard things, feedback, like difficult conversations, like that's all sport. We know how to do that. And yet when we get into a different context, the translation doesn't always happen. We spend a lot of time at Railroads helping our students translate, for the exact constructivist reasons you describe, bring what you've learned out there into here, because we actually need it in our learning community. But I think we really struggle in the same way to bring what we know about sport into an organization. It's interesting because there's a lot of organizational science that is mapped onto sport. Like we say, well, we know this
Mhm.
about whatever leadership, and let's bring that into sport. And that works too. But I think it needs to go the other way as well. And, when you mentioned mental health and performance, that actually can contradict, because I think we have a very like abrasive conceptualization of performance. And so when we
Mhm.
try to mash that into the care and compassion that you talked about around
Mhm.
health,
Mhm.
seem to fit. But of course, performance is just wonderful and exciting. Like you said, like it's a celebration,
Yeah.
trying your best. And so of course, I agree. I can't be mentally healthy unless I'm learning, I'm challenged, I'm doing exciting things. And yet we're almost afraid to do that because of the way performance has started to kind of transmogrify into this, I don't know, scratchy.
No, I absolutely love that, and that's why, again, when I first moved back to Canada from the United States, I was the one who, the community here wasn't, like, ready for some of my ideas. I was the one who was saying, maybe we should do a mental health screen," and they were like, "Why? That's ridiculous," and I was like, "Well, we're kinda seeing how the physical body's gonna handle load. Maybe we should do that," and so, um but I think a lot about these things, like we're all human beings at the end of the day. And if we're going to load people, how are we going to respond and react to that? And what I love some of the research coming out on self-compassion theory with Kristen Neff, and if you want to stay committed to your goals, I had one of my master's student who did looked at failure experiences, looked at people's level of self-compassion, and found that when people were more self-compassionate, they had better heart rate variability. Well, heart rate variability is a parameter that's used in all sorts of ways. It's underlying health, it's recovery from heart attack, it's performing on demand, it's maintaining your executive functioning, and there's just so much great research. And I also like some of the underlying psychophysiology. Like if we sat down and we're having a really tough conversation, I'm not going to have great physiology. If I hang on to my sport at night and I'm not sleeping, that's not good for recovery. So again, I love it. I definitely at a different point in my career where when people go down that path of the difference, I definitely am able to think through it a little bit differently and think about why I think it's valuable. But yeah, if we want to be the best at something, we have to be physically well. We know that. We spend so much time taking care of our body. And we also have to be mentally well. And I think a lot about emotional injuries in sport. I think about tough experiences and how do we keep people learning and growing through that so that they can stay well through the sport journey. And if we're in a good place, then as administrators are going to make different decisions. I also wanted to comment on what you were saying about the kind of the business of sport. And I have an athlete that just incredible. The sports system, we have so many incredible athletes and just incredible humans, and she's one of those people. She comes from the sport of wrestling, and her name is Leah Ferguson. And um, she talks a lot about the importance of having good business practice in a sport organization because that clarity, that transparency, that makes it safe because people know what the process looks like. They know where to ask questions, and the challenge as well with amateur sport in our country is it's so understaffed. That's one of the things maybe we're not even being honest about. And what's happening now with all the safe sport things is it's being added to people's plate on the side of their desks with people that are very overwhelmed. And when you look at large corporations, they have a C-suite. They have a whole group of people who make decisions and discuss, and they have time allocated. And sometimes in sport, it's one person. And that's a lot of pressure on that one person. So I think just organizationally, as we move into these places, we're starting to recognize the importance of those business practices and applying them in a way so that then we can do this great stuff and have fun, but we need to take care of the business side of things too.
And that's where, I'm frustrated with so many of these things
Mm.
templated, so much of the education around, boards and governance, because sport is also all volunteer because it's so understaffed, so many volunteers. So you're wandering in, you may not know how to coach, but
Mm.
it's mom and you're supposed to coach now. And then, but where do you go to get the resources to learn how to do that? Or same with the board, like they just don't.
Yeah.
And we just, like you say, throw rocks when they screw up because, well, you should have known. Well, there's a very complex act, I guess we could go look at, but yes,
Yes,
right.
very true. Well said.
Understaffed, undereducated. And then, like you say, now there's this huge load of dealing with all the problems on top of it. And we're just buried. I feel like a lot of sport reflects the truth, healing, and reconciliation process too. And what you said about being compassionate toward these leaders who like the complexity of the responsibilities. We can't just say it has to be all about care and kindness and safety and forget about the fact that there is the financial aspect, there's the organizational, other people's jobs, like you've got all these other responsibilities. We have to have the whole problem, right, in view. And then this compassion for leaders. So truth, healing, we always add healing in there now, and reconciliation. In the healing part, any kind of, healing from or fostering a social change or shifting a paradigm, there's also like a lot of people are afraid to lose something in there, right? Which is why we never, like, we won't move on some of this stuff. If you look at actually indigeneity in Canada, right, it's just not really moving. And because people are hanging on to something they're afraid to lose. And so whether it's confidence or security or whatever that is, power, let's acknowledge that too. Hey, we do a lot of that for sure. So how do we be more compassionate leaders? Okay, this is a little bit off script, but yeah, we're attacking our leaders or like crazy. And they kind of, because we're so litigious as well, they almost don't have a choice but to dig in and hunker down and batten down the hatches, because afraid if they come forth and go, oh my God, we screwed up, lawsuits are going to bury them. How do we navigate that, Adrienne? That's a big question, but what do you think about that?
Well, I do. I think there is a lot of complexity to there, and that's definitely where I feel like my strength is the human part in creating space. There's another incredible athlete from our system named Jess Leganhart, and she's a partner in a law firm in Kamloops, and that actually is something we've been having conversations around is because I have run into that not in sport necessarily, but in corporate settings where it's very difficult to resolve issues at times because of HR and other things that are put into place to protect people, but sometimes it makes it very difficult to deal with things because of all those protections. And so I would say that I don't think I have a good answer to that, but I'm in the process of trying to explore that because I'm curious about it. And I'm trying to figure out how we can combine the two because I think it's necessary. I think that we have to honor and understand the legalities and the HR policies and procedures, and we need to honor that and understand that, but we have to do it in a human way. And we have to understand that everything has a cost, and I guess that's the thing too. If you weigh more in that direction, then you eliminate that. And, I do. I think that that's a huge issue. And, I go back to even what Dean Holland said to me with part of it too, is you have to find out what's important to the people. How do we encourage them to want to change? How do we encourage them to want to become part of that solution? And, yeah, I think that it's those are ongoing challenges, I think, in this space, and necessary challenges, and I think that hopefully everyone continues to show up and ask those questions and help us move in that direction. That's the other thing too that I think is important in doing this work is that the Culture of Excellence Project is this small thing, and we're recognizing that everyone has to be change agents in this process. We have had, weekend seminars where we've met with the summer high performance advisors, the winter high performance advisors. We've gone to the spin conference a few times to have conversation. And at the last spin conference, we want everyone to see themselves as change agents. And how do we all start, this process? And I guess that's one of the things is if everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction, it becomes less optional that, these are just the type of spaces we're creating. And we're having a summit coming up on, I think it's called the Culture of Excellence Summit in High Performance Sport, where, getting everyone in the room to have conversation around this and, not be as fearful, because again, if I think of my constructivist philosophy story, I think that sometimes there's silence. Sometimes people aren't stepping in because they're not sure what to say. They're like, oh my gosh, what if the person says this? I don't know what to do with that information. And so we want to try to help develop skills in that area so that we're more comfortable talking about the human and complex pieces in those spaces. There's all sorts of reasons. And I guess I will commit to continuing to be curious about it and continuing to live in a place of discomfort as I explore these issues. If I become really comfortable and okay, then I'm probably not where I need to be in these spaces. So I want to continue to not be comfortable, continue to ask questions that I think I want to have asked, because I might have more power than someone else in that system who might not have the power to ask that question. And so I will always honor the people I've worked with and learned from. And that's something I've always done. I mentioned I'm a psychologist and mental performance consultant, but I am that person who recognizes that if I'm in my office and I have an athlete who is not feeling comfortable in a space with a very strong coach, the worst thing I can do is align and empathize with that athlete and not provide them the skills to be able to lead up and go talk to that coach. And I think that's where I'm always thinking in that way when I'm having these conversations. Um, and that's why I think it's so important that we keep leaders at the table, because ultimately they do have the power to move things forward and create that change. And we need to make sure they feel comfortable doing so and that they're excited to do so and they feel supported, in doing that really hard work.
Yeah, it's like you talked about with the reframing of the proposal, right? Like what are there, we also need to consider
Exactly.
them to want to actually change. If we think of the NHL right now, so what is going to motivate them to actually want to change and protect athletes?
People not going to the games probably, right? Like it will be that's a professional sport organization, so it would have to hit the bottom line, I think, for that change to take place.
Then you look at women's sport, because the argument was always, oh, they don't bring in the box office, right? But they do.
Mm.
It's amazing if we give it a shot. So sometimes it's also kind of, like you say, it's not optional. Like maybe there needs to also be a little more momentum to push in that direction. And then we'll discover, oh yeah, there is a total
Hmm.
that's to all of
Hmm.
this stuff. I think Safe Sport is helping actually to
Mm.
work through the Safe Sport processes. I know it's a heavy load, but also I think it's helping us renegotiate some of the red tape, some of the legality, and find a way to actually kind of blend it and be more human. Because I do see the Safe Sport process becoming less, just watching all these different cases,
Yeah.
unfold, less litigious, less kind of cross-examination. There's a much
Mhm.
balanced human. So that's encouraging. Let's talk about the CAAT. You mentioned the
Yeah.
conference, and you and I actually met at one of the initial think tank gatherings.
That you facilitated.
Well, I don't even know. I think I just
You did. You were definitely, oh, you know what? You might have done the research component of it, but that is definitely, yes. So I met you at the very first think tank around this idea. It wasn't called a culture of excellence there. It was just around, gosh, there's this thing that happens when people come back from multi-sport games and we start talking about who underperformed. And it seems really not attached to kind of like underlying physiology and VO2 max. It seems more this human thing that's really awkward to get our hands around. What is that? And then through that became a culture of excellence project. And then Kyle Paquette was charged with um, coming up with a model or thinking through what it looks like based on a presentation that he had made, I believe, at a spin conference. And then he took on a different role, and that's when I became a bit more involved. I was asked to kind of come in and take over the reins a little bit from Kyle at the time, and that's where I had the trepidation. I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do this.
and it
I
really,
don't know if you want me.
this organizational theory around how do we, that's been talked about forever, Blake and Mouton, and how do we blend, yes, productivity, but also humanity, people performance, and have it on an axis, and then what's up in that top quadrant, right? And so yes, now it's on circ, it's on the Podium site too. People can have a look at some of the dimensions or factors of the sport environment that can contribute to something that holds both at the same time. Lovely. And what's the CAAT? Tell us about the
Yes, the CAAT is basically an assessment tool. There are a lot of different cultural assessment tools. The CAAT is called the Cultural Assessment Audit Tool, and it's specifically developed for high performance sport environments in Canada. And you mentioned the different dimensions, and as you mentioned, you can look at the dimensions that are assessed. There is an article in Circ, and I'm sure, knowing you, Jen, you'll have a link to it in your resources. And yes, and so there's people dimensions. So there's aspects of the person element, and there's aspects of the performance element. And the idea is that in high performance sport environments, people are doing to try and be successful, to try and be the best versions of themselves, to try and challenge themselves to become great. And so there are performance aspects or elements of that that are important that we need to do. We need to have pathways available to them. We need to have coaching support. They need to have sport medical support. Those are all very important things. And we also recognize that there are person elements. There's self-determination theory. There is psychological safety. There are certain person elements that are really important as well. And so what happens is the tool is again, there's an 8-step process we go through where again, we get to know it. We meet with the leaders initially, and we talk to the leaders and talk about what they'd like to get out of this process. We talk about who do you think would like to be assessed. The other thing, there's been a lot of due diligence to try and make it a tool so that people can show up with honesty. So it's the results are the culture and wellness facilitators, which is myself and several other individuals from literally across the country. There's um, individuals in your area. Jordan Ellsworth is from your neck of the woods, as is Andre and Leroy, all the way over to Halifax, where Danielle Poulis is. So we literally go across the country, and we have also French speakers with Sophie Brassard. So we literally have people from all across the country that are invested in this process. They've done a lot of training about holding space, and only they can see the qualitative. So when this is done, only the culture and wellness facilitator can see the qualitative data. So it's very, very safe and secure. The other data, only the culture and wellness facilitator and whoever is deemed as the cultural championship in the national sport organization, they're the only ones that can see the other data. So it's very much designed to be that way. The other thing too, it's so interesting from a technology perspective because athletes travel a lot. The other thing is that if an athlete starts doing it on their phone and then they open their laptop to start doing it again, they will not be recognized as the same person because there's so much effort being put in to protect that data so that that if they want to do it again, they have to jump on the same device. Otherwise, you're seen as a different person. So there's no names attached to the data. It's all very anonymous. So there's been a lot of effort behind the scenes to make it a place where people can show up with truth. And I think that's really, really important for people to know. And the culture and wellness facilitators are all trained we are doing a disservice to this process if we don't have real conversations about the truth that shows up. And we know that. If we really want to move this forward, then we do have to have the courage to have these really hard conversations. And we're trained to do that. And at the end of the day, and again, I think about a national sport organization where I was doing some diversity work and it's very challenging. And at one point it's challenging. And one of the co-facilitators internally, I said, we're making the world a better place for everyone, including the folks that are resisting, and they just don't understand that yet. And that's really the way I see this whole culture of excellence process. It's we all want the same things. We want to get unbelievable results. We want to support these incredible human beings and being the best they can be. And having these conversations will actually help us get there, and that's where we want to get to. So hopefully over time we become more trusting of all these processes and we realize that we all have the same goal and the same page. It's just we have such different ways of getting there right now. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah, yeah. And so when these leaders get some feedback and then there's some, they can start to design, and you mentioned I work with boxing on this, they can start to
Yeah, that's true.
design
You
a
can talk about your
process,
experience. Yeah.
right, for how to then bring into alignment anything that seems to be sticky or misconstrued or, misaligned somehow. And, we invite our students all the time at Rural Roads to point out where those cracks are, not very complex or scientific, but we just say, hey, where do you see us not living our values? Like you see us living our values in all these ways, but there are other places where we're not. And they'll be like, well, we think, you talk about sustainability, but then we have peacocks on campus. And so you see some of the maintenance guys spraying peacock poop off the sidewalks, right? And it looks very unsustainable. Like you're just wasting all this water. And we're like, well, actually, we gather water from the roofs, but we don't tell them about it. We don't tell them about it. So
Yeah.
often it's just like you said
Hmm.
way at the beginning, if there isn't the clarity of policies and all that, but if it's not communicated,
Absolutely.
okay, and that's why I'm in the School of Communication and Culture. The two are so linked. But that's another thing a lot of people don't realize, right? Is that they need to actually say it all the time or point to where it is or, yeah.
And in my experience too, that's one of the first things to go when we're really busy. And, and we talked about how, understaffed sport is and how busy they are, and especially when we get to pressure. And so then we sometimes just assume or don't communicate. And at the end of the day, it's a human business and we're all doing the very best we can. And we show up as ourselves and we show up with our histories. And, we need to all understand kind of what that means and how we can be the best version of ourselves every day and how we can move these things forward.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So what do you see? What have been some of the challenges, or or do you have any stories of where, wow, this really worked well, or, we need to, you've mentioned a few things you're refining, but in working with sport leaders, do you see some real, momentum building or directions that are having a good impact? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that I'm about sustainable processes and how do we weave that in. And so it's been interesting all the different iterations. At first, I think it was this thing that everyone had trepidation about. How's this going to work? I don't know if it'll work. And I'm like, oh, we'll see. And now I think it's becoming more part of the process and more valued. So, for example, we have had sports that now, or they want to do a second version of the CAAT, like they want to reissue it because they've worked on some changes. They want to reissue it, see what they can learn. Um, so people are requesting that. I think where we're at now is we're starting to understand the complexities of NSOs and the demands on their time. And so I think on the front end now we'll talk more about when is the best time to do this process for you, when you have more time to work on some of that change process. And so we're just sort of honestly figuring out how it fits within the system. Our challenges have been around some of the things you've identified, communication, and so again, that's where we found that we weren't setting the culture and wellness facilitators up for success. And NSO has no idea who this human is. They're calling and saying they want it, like, who are you? And so then we like, okay, so the very first process now, we sit in a room with the key stakeholders, on the podium shows up at the call, like their high performance advisor shows up to the call, the HPD shows up to the call, I show up to the call. We all sit in the room and talk about this is what the process is. Then at that point, it becomes independent, and then the wellness facilitators are assigned. So then, based on like language requirements, other things, we find that. We also always have a pairing process. When I was developing this process, I fought very hard to have pairings because this is very hard work. And I wanted two people so that they could they'll have different strengths, they can bounce ideas off of each other because I know the work, it has to be done right. This work has to be done well and right. And I wanted to have two people paired together so that it created that strength. And so after that call, we then think very strategically about who those wellness facilitators will be based on a fit in so many different ways. We also, with all the wellness facilitators, look at conflicts of interest. If people have any experience with an NSO, then they would not be assigned to that NSO. So it can be an independent process. So we have a lot of those contingencies in place to ensure that it can be a process where we can look objectively at the information that we find. And yeah, so it's honestly been an evolving process. And I think that and even conversations around, at that initial meeting, do we have high performance advisors there or not? How does that look? And um, but now it's been interesting. I think that we're in a different time in sport. I've worked in sport for many, many years. And as I mentioned, when I moved back from the States, I was suggesting things and people thought, whoa, who's this person? But now there's a different openness. People are recognizing we need to do this work. We need the culture to change. We need to create these spaces. So there isn't as much resistance, I don't think, from the system as there used to be. And so that's a positive as well. So the thing I'm most proud of is the internal conversations we're helping to have. Like when we go to the SPIN conference and um, we talk to service providers about how do we hold space for these conversations, because everyone signed the Universal Code of Conduct now, but what do we have we taken the time to talk about? Um, well, how do we action that? Like, if you actually see this happening, who would you talk to? How would you say it? People need those skills to feel comfort, and step into those spaces that we're asking them to. But everything's new, like that's great. That's a great step we've made in that direction. And now it's like, okay, now that it's here, now what do we do with it? So there's so much great energy, even when I was at Say Sport International, and Tennis Canada has an incredible process that they have right now. And Lorraine Lafreniere was there from Coaching Association Canada, and they're doing a lot of different webinars. So I think that there's so much happening in the space, and that's the other reason why we're kind of having that culture of excellence think tank or summit, so that we can start to what is out there, and also we had another weekend where we spent with game plan advisors. So there's a lot of people in the system who want to do good, want to support, and we're just, we're all trying to figure out how it all works together now, and what's the place for internal things and what's the place for external things. And we need everyone, to move in that direction, and do the good work that I know everyone wants in sport right now.
Yeah. And, we're talking about high performance or national sport organizations, pretty much national teams
Yeah,
is where this work is being done. And so what does this mean, do you think, or what needs to happen more broadly, right, to grassroots across all realms of sport, hey? And because we are seeing the issues of, power imbalance or just poor sportsmanship, abusive officials. Like there's still these issues
absolutely.
raging across sport in different realms of it. What do you think? What do you think could
Yeah.
be
Well,
born?
first of all, I do think it's really important. It's always top down, as you know, from a leadership perspective. So I do think that if you have practices that are producing results up top, then it will not change down here. And so I do think that we do need to take care of the top, so that there's a model there, and we prove that it is sustainable. You can achieve excellence in this healthier way. So I think that's very important. I do know that there has been conversations. I know that Danielle Poulos, who I know and perhaps Ken Bagnall out in Atlantic, they were talking about more of a provincial, regional kind of version of the CAAT. As the CAAT is now, the questions just don't align well with those levels of sport performance, or sport investment. And but I do know that there has been conversations about the need for that. So I do think that they're looking at developing some type of tool that can be used at those levels. And again, I think that what's tricky at the regional levels is, again, maybe we'll get back to our initial conversation around the closed versus open system there, and the lack of, it's volunteer run, and it's really dependent on the human who has so much value in that rural community that everyone loves, that's been doing it forever. They have to believe this is important, because without them, nothing happens in that sport. And so we have to um, honor those folks and help them, integrate some of these things, because you used a sport like hockey. If Hockey Canada says something, but Jimmy in some small community is doing it a different way, everyone's going to love Jimmy. They're not going to look at Hockey Canada. So I think that we have to recognize um, the culture of how sport is delivered in our country. And yeah, it has to reach people in a different way, because it is volunteer run, and these folks have been so generous with their time for so many years. They have a lot of power and respect in those communities, and they have to believe it's important for that community to experience that change, I think. But I'm not sure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree that it's the who's modeling the behavior, right? And for a while
Yeah,
now, we took on and I think it was really well-meaning, took on more of a, rah, like go for it, we're gonna earn more medals because
yeah,
Canada wasn't. I mean, I think back to the 76 Winter Games. I feel like there were maybe one or two medals won back then, right? It's amazing to watch how now we're kind of a force at the Winter and Summer Games. And I think people like that, right? Because it also then inspires kids to get involved in all those sports that they see on the Olympic stage. It's the most watched thing in the world. So why wouldn't we want to take advantage of that? But it's like now, oh, we have to correct a little because it's become too much the one way about winning. And we're forgetting about, oh yeah, well, we also need to win as champions, like healthy and leadership and sportsmanlike and all these other qualities. So how do we get that? So how do we model that, which I think we're trying to do, learning to do maybe, yeah. And it's hard because they're
yeah,
balancing a lot of things. And then that's going to have a trickle down or out effect of inspiring everybody to see, as you say, that it can be done in a way that's also healthy and safe and fun and all these other things. And that it can be just as successful. It doesn't mean that everybody's gonna,
Yeah.
we're gonna swing the other way and everybody gets a ribbon. And I think it's coming, and we just have to keep calling for
Yeah.
kind of blend and integration of those concepts. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And my understanding is that prior to the Vancouver Olympics, when on the podium, that concept came to be in Canada, because Canada was the only host Olympics in the past who underperformed. Every
Right.
other country has the Olympics and everyone is great. And we had the Olympics and everyone had a tough day, And so we're like, so it came out of such a good place of saying we want to make sure the athletes are prepared for all the pressure they're going to experience, And so that's kind of where it came from. And then there was success. And so then it became, and again, there's so much, I agree with, everything that you said. And I think that, continue to align high performance sport with the values of Canadian citizens. And that's when Canadians are going to jump behind it, because they ultimately, you look at Norway and some of the other countries, and it really is developed. Their sport model is around, how do we develop people that are going to be great leaders in our society? Because we know with the investment of sport, they are going to have the skills for that. And we want them to be unbelievable leaders. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I think that at the end of the day, that's, how do we be good citizens? And I continuously reflect on the lessons that we teach in sport. And I think that's where sport doesn't do a good enough job of talking about that. I remember, speaking of hockey, Mel Davidson, when I worked with Hockey Canada and we'd be at World Championships, and the day before competition, we'd always go out for a meal together. And Mel would always say, and I started to think about sport differently because of this. And she would say that you need to keep in mind that this World Championships is just not about the growth of the athletes. Every human who's here investing in this, you're going to grow and go back a different person. And so you are going to be changed because of your experience here, and you're going to grow. And then she would always challenge people to say, when you go back home, where are you going to choose to make a difference? Because the investment's been made in you. Where are you going to make an impact? You're going to volunteer somewhere. Like, what are you going to do to make your community better when you return from this? And now when I go to a Golf Canada event or something, I see all the volunteers, I think about it that way. And I think, wow, sport isn't just about the person who's competing in the event. It's about the whole community created around it. And I think that's where sport, we don't do a good enough job of honoring our role in developing human beings. It's not just about, wow, you learned how to swim strokes. It's like you learned life skills, and now you're going to be a different human when you contribute to our world afterwards. And maybe we need to do a better job of articulating that value so people can get behind it and understand, because right now it looks very expensive. But yeah, it's worth the investment, because we need leaders and we need people who can hold space for these challenging things and these challenging conversations.
Exactly. And I like how you illustrated how, yes, there's this trickle from the leaders that are modeling it, but it actually stems from the values of the humans in Canada. And what do you think? This is just a fun
Yeah.
thing to finish on that I've been thinking about with other people. What are the values of Canadians around sport? Like what are Canadian values? It's like asking what's Canadian food, right? It's almost,
Yeah.
but what do we value, and what do you think we really value in sport as a country? And is that even
Mm.
possible to distill?
Yeah, I think that is really tough. And you know, d- I've traveled a lot. I have relatives in different countries, and so a sport like a country like Australia, they I think they do really they value success and winning, and that's very important. I do think Canadians are different. I think um, we value inclusivity. We value everyone having the opportunity to be successful in their own way. I think that we value goodness, like being good people. I think that Canadians very much, yeah, value treating people with kindness and respect. I think that, and that's why I think some of the incidents you read about, I think that Canadian citizens very quickly don't want anything to do with, sport, because that's so against. They're like, wow, no, you're not special because you're an athlete. Like, we're all accountable to making our world a better place. I think that we um, we have a very hardworking, rational mindset kind of in Canada, where I also think, honestly, I think psychological safety. I think Canadians value people. Um, being able to be treated kindly and well and having an environment that's safe. I think that that's something very important for them. But again, I could be completely irrational. I don't know. Maybe that's just what I value. I'm not sure. But you
Well,
know, I think those things are all important. And what's really neat for me is that I think that those are actually things that will lead to excellence, and so they're not mutually exclusive. That's a beautiful thing.
yeah.
And when I was interesting because I was, as I mentioned, a faculty member in the United States for a number of years, and then I left, tenure faculty to come work in sport, and I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And um, as I reflected on that, I realized that what I love about sport is that I'm gonna, and a high performance athlete, when they really reach that level, they do have some sort of gift or ability they've been born with, and I know that their process of realizing that they're going to learn a lot about themselves along the way. And if I can help to create space to help them be the best version of themselves, they're going to live their lives differently afterwards, and that's a pretty special process. And it's I'll give you, and the last story I'll end with was I went to just a public lecture once, and someone wasn't able to go and they invited, so I went and I had no idea what I was going to, but it happened to be Winnie Horn-Miller was speaking, and she's a wonderful speaker. And she was talking about a race in the United States where it's still considered one of the best races of all time. And this individual, the United States does not often win distance races, and it was a 3,000 or 5,000. I cannot remember the name of the individual. And afterwards, though, I went home and watched the race, and he came from behind and took like all the risk, and he was either going to win a gold medal or this person would not finish the race, but he took all the risk. And then afterwards, someone was chatting with him, and the interviewer was kind of like, well, why did you do that? Like, you could have got a guaranteed bronze, and then you risked it. Why? And he said, most people in this race I know are going about 92, 93% in, I can't remember the exact percentage, but they're saving 7% because they know if they fail, they need to pick themselves up. He goes, I was able to go 100% in because I have a community that supports me, and I knew I didn't have to it didn't matter. And when we left, I had a student with me, and I said, oh, so what did you like about the presentation? And he said, you know what, I'm trying to figure out how I can be that extra 7% for everyone I work with. And I said, that's beautiful. And that's to me what sport is about how do we create an environment where people can actually go all in and see what their potential is because there's no risk. We'll pick them up. We'll pick them up, and that person who does that is going to learn so much about themselves along the way, and they're going to live their life and contribute to our society differently afterwards. And so I guess that's maybe at the very beginning, maybe that's why I like sport, is that process of helping people be the best version of themselves when it matters most. How do I help them show up?
That's beautiful. Beautiful thing to end on. And I love that we'll pick them up. Yeah. Not to be afraid that you're going to be flat on your face at the end and no one will be there. Of course we will.
Yeah.
Because you took the risk. It's awesome. It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Thank you. That was a really great conversation, as always. And I really appreciate all that you shared. I think it's really important work that is happening in the country that we need to showcase and share and get out there. So people understand. And a lot of talk about compassion, which I think is, I like to put a finer point on that, right? That we all just need to really put our arms around each other and know that we're working through it together. A lot to be afraid of out there too. So maybe a little bit more compassion will be a good thing. Help us all work through it faster. Cool.
Absolutely.
We'll chat soon, and really appreciate you taking all this time out. Always nice to talk to you, and we'll catch up after. Okay.
You too.
Take care. Thanks, Adrienne.
Take care of yourselves. Congrats for getting the internet going.
Right on. Bye-bye.